And welcome to your Political Pulse. We are joined by State Senator Amber Hulse, who's always one of our favorite guests, because as I always say, I say this every time, our bravest, very first person who ever came in here and did the show.
Political Pulse with Amber Hulse.
With Amber Hulse, I know. You really, I mean, the way that rings, I should just be like handing you the host chair, the laptop, the mic, the whole thing. I'll give you Cody's name in the back, and you know. Anyways, we've got a lot to discuss. The legislature's obviously right up on our heels. Full disclosure, this episode goes out Monday, so this would be like right up against the state of the state. The governor's about to deliver that. What do you hope to hear from the governor in his message next week?
Well, obviously, being the state senator for Fall River, Custer, and parts of Pennington County, I want to hear about property taxes, because that's one thing that we didn't hear about in the budget address, which he may not have mentioned in the budget address for a reason. Maybe that's, you know, some other plan that he has going. So that's one thing. The other thing that I'd like to hear a little bit more about is his plan for education, because there's been a lot of people since the budget address that have been concerned about no increases for teacher pay and no increases in education funding. When you don't increase education funding, and we're seeing a huge dip in the amount of students that are actually attending our public schools, it ends up being a cut to education funding for a lot of these rural schools that, you know, even if they have less children, they still have to have about the same amount of teachers. And so we haven't seen that dip go low enough to actually need to make schools smaller. They still need, many of the state requirements require them to have the same amount of staff, even if there are 5 or 10 kids less. So these cuts are going to be really hard for rural school districts.
Out of those three, do you think that lawmakers might be able to convince the governor to allow for some increases there with education?
I think that there's a little bit of wiggle room in the budget, especially when we're talking about what the governor was proposing and putting 12% away for the rainy day fund instead of 10%. So that little bit of wiggle room, I think you'll end up seeing negotiated to go towards education or some other issue area that wasn't getting the funding that it deserved in the governor's initial budget.
Okay, so you went right to property taxes. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of property taxes, the legislature is pretty quick. It's a quick legislature. What do you hope to see by the end of this legislature?
I want real relief for people for property taxes, so that's the major concern and the one thing that I'm really focused on. The other thing that I think is really important, especially this year, is we have many elections on the ballot this year, all the way from the U.S. Senate all the way down to, you know, your county commissioner races, school board elections. So 2026 is a big year in South Dakota for elections. So there's a little election law cleanup bills that I have on the table to make sure that when we are going into 2026 and then, you know, 2028 in the future as well, that we're not having some of the issues that we had in the last election cycle.
Okay, on to property taxes. Before we get into some of these issues, you were telling me that you might retry Senate Bill 191. This was your Senate bill last year that got pretty close, got unanimous support in the Senate, got out of that House committee there at the very end, then ultimately died on the House floor. What do you think are percentage chances that you bring 191 back?
You know, like, I don't know if I have a necessarily like exact percentage, but it's been interesting the last like week or so. I think people are really digging their heels in and learning more about some of the property tax proposals that are on the table that came out of the summer study. And one of the things that I think frustrates me as a lawmaker is that whenever there's an issue, I always ask myself, what is the problem? And then how do we actually solve that problem? And a lot of the proposed solutions that have come out of the summer study and some of these task forces, they're more Band-Aid fixes or trying to replace revenue instead of raising it with property taxes, which is one way to try to fix it. But really, the property tax system in South Dakota was working for a very long time just fine. And it was the recent, you know, moves to the state that increased the assessment values by so much because of some of the requirements that we have with assessment values. So if you really ask what is the problem, it's the assessment value formulation that we use in South Dakota and a lack of protection against having, you know, crazy assessment values and not a reactionary levy system, so that if your basis is increasing exponentially, that your levy actually decreases enough to not have your property taxes go up wildly. And that's essentially what 191, Senate Bill 191 intended to do. I've interestingly had a few people, both from like the real estate world and in the middle of the state where they don't have that many issues with property taxes reach out to me recently and say, your proposal actually was a really good idea. And while it did need a couple tweaks, especially for some rural fire departments and other, very specific issues that maybe it would have caused, I might be bringing at least a version of it back, or at least, the idea back to the table to see if anybody wants to bite now that more legislators are more educated on the property tax issue.
Do you think it helps having them go through that summer task force process, really think about this, and then maybe venture back, look back at 191?
I think, again, it helped people become more educated. The property tax issue is obviously very complicated, and I do believe that many people not that they didn't understand, but I don't think they understood the nuances of what was really happening. And now that they see what some of the proposals are going to provide for relief and how much the people really want substantive relief, if not close to abolishment of property taxes, the only thing that's really going to provide something that's going to be long-lasting relief, or at least something that for years to come will protect people from something like what happened in 2020 to 2025, remember happening again, is 191, unless we completely blow up the property tax system and find some other source of revenue to the tune of $600 million or something like that, completely to abolish property taxes. It's over $1 billion, and I just don't see that really being a reality. If somebody has an idea out there, let me know. You'd be the most popular person in South Dakota. But I think really, if you're trying to do your due diligence and look at what is good governance and what other states have done to try to protect from issues like this, 191 really is in line with what other states have done for policy. So.
And I know on the assessment side, you were saying that you're eyeing some legislation or considering some legislation to allow homeowners to challenge their assessments, but ultimately not be hit with the legal bill at the end of it, should they be correct in saying that their property was misassessed.
Yeah, there's a couple issues, both with attached garages and pole barns and things that are still used for residential purposes, and those being assessed incorrectly, or at least assessed differently from county to county. So that's one of the issues. But then also, there's been several people who obviously have challenged their assessments through the local processes and been struck down by the county commissioners or the local processes. And so one of the things that I'd like to do is create a cause of action so that folks that are, essentially without recourse can pursue a legal remedy of challenging their assessment values outside of the people. It's kind of crazy that we're letting the people who are creating the assessment values also be the ones to decide whether or not you're correct or not when you challenge them. And so it would kind of take it out of the hands of the decision makers there and into the hands of a circuit court judge. And then if the property tax payer was found to actually be correct that their assessment was too high, then they would be awarded attorney's fees. Because right now, the cost of hiring a lawyer and going through that process is probably more than what additional fees you're paying in property taxes. So it doesn't make sense financially to pursue these legal challenges right now, but people don't have any recourse to challenge these other than the local processes. And again, if the people at the local level are the ones deciding whether or not your challenge is successful, it kind of, creates a conflict of interest.
So you want to move it out, move it into the circuit court.
Yeah, and again, I'm still working on some of what that exactly would look like and the nuances of all of that, but and making sure that the circuit court has the proper factors or considerations, so we're not just giving it to someone who's not knowledgeable about property tax assessments, because it is a very complicated, and oftentimes they use a lot of computer systems and things like that. So I don't want to overburden the circuit court system either, but I do believe that people deserve their day in court or some kind of just recourse to pursue if they do feel like they're wrongly being assessed.
Senator Randy Dybert, I know, has proposed allowing the sales tax to essentially rise back up to 4.5%. Right now it's at 4.2%, and that's supposed to sunset. And then take that money, that 0.3%, and apply that towards property taxes. I know this is a policy, I believe, that you're a fan of this fund.
Well, so the important thing about Randy Dybert's proposal is that it's creating a separate fund. And so every time that you raise any type of state level revenue, all of it goes into this thing called the general fund, which is essentially a big bucket of money that is where we pull everything that we spend money on from the state government. That's what we appropriate out of. What Randy Dybert's proposal would do would create a separate fund so that any money that is raised that is supposed to be going to property tax relief gets set aside in a special, essentially, bank account at the state level so that it's not touched and it's kept away from that big bucket of funds. And that's important because we've seen in the past other revenue that was raised that was supposed to go to education or teacher pay or what have you that wasn't used for those purposes later on down the line. And so this is ensuring that that does happen. And then we kind of know how much money we're dealing with so that we can provide the property tax relief. But the other thing that is really important when you're talking about some of these alternative sources of revenue and giving them to the state level, my first question is then, okay, how are you going to distribute that money out to the counties and what is fair to each county? Because as we've seen in school funding for the Black Hills and Hill City School District, Custer School District, Deadwood School District, they don't get very much state aid for their schools. In fact, all of those schools that I just mentioned get no money in state aid in the formula. And so whatever the formula is that actually distributes that money from that separate fund down to the counties for property tax relief will be very important. And Black Hills residents should really pay attention to any politician's plan to give property tax relief and ask that question specifically of how much money is my county specifically going to get and what is my county going to see for relief, because it's different county to county.
Do you think there should be something built in there that some sort of equation that and it kind of creates a link between how much property values have risen maybe in the last decade and how much aid goes to that county?
Well, it's interesting because the South Dakota Constitution has a clause that is often referred to as the Fair Taxation Clause. And so you have to be really careful with some of these proposals to not create some kind of unfair taxation scheme. Now, personally, I believe that if you're providing, unfair, uneven relief to areas that have seen growth or increases in assessment, that's different than increases in taxation itself, because quite frankly, the current property tax system to me is unfair to residents in the Black Hills. And so that relief is needed at a different rate than some of the other areas of the state that haven't had the issues that we have. But that's one of the things that's actually interesting about the governor's proposal with the county sales tax is that, whatever the county raises at the local level in their sales tax that's optional for them to put on would then be kept at the county level and would go to your county budget. And so to me, that's a good carrot for counties that have, great thriving main streets. If your main street's doing great and you can raise enough money to pay for all of your county budgets, to fix your roads and to pay for your police force and all of that, that's great. And then the counties that, don't do as good of a job with their, economy and maybe aren't, they don't have as much going on because they're a smaller farming community or something, they don't have as big of an issue with property taxes. And so they wouldn't even need a sales tax and they'll just keep raising it with property taxes. And so it gives the county officials the choice to weigh of what would work for their county the best. And so I do have an interest in that one because, again, it is fair because if your county raises that money, you get to keep that money. Mm-hmm. And I know that it'll stay local and, counties like Custer and Fall River will get to keep the money that they've raised with that sales tax. Whereas some of these ideas that's giving all the money to the state government, there's no guarantee that you're actually going to see that in the end, especially when you're in the Black Hills, because we have less representation in Pierre by numbers of legislators anyway. And so it's often hard to get that money to come back to Western South Dakota.
So we were actually in Pierre yesterday speaking with the governor, and he was saying he was getting a lot of positive feedback on that proposal. It sounds like you're at least somewhat of a fan of this proposal.
Well, I'm a fan because I know that it will actually give some sort of relief to my area in a way that will be less burdensome. Our area oftentimes is the area that has all the tourism, right? And so while we oftentimes are left out of the state level, sometimes money coming back to the area, we do raise a lot of money locally with sales tax because of how much tourism we have. And so it essentially gives us a reward for having to deal with all the tourism during the summer.
Deal with the Californians?
Exactly, Blake.
Like my family members?
Yes, exactly. You're okay.
Okay.
We'll keep you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So I know when you're not a state senator, you are usually working on election law, and it sounds like you've got some election integrity bills on the way this session.
Yeah, I just actually got done working on a preliminary injunction hearing in your home state of California to challenge the congressional districts. And so that was eating up most of my fall. Very glad that we're waiting on a decision for that and that mini trial is over with. But yeah, this is my passion, is election law. And in South Dakota, on the ballot in 2026, we have several elections coming up. And so you'll see several bills, I think, trying to ensure that the elections in South Dakota are running as smoothly as possible, especially with how many races we're going to have on the ballot in 2026. Last year, one of the things that got passed was that school board and I believe municipal elections are supposed to be on the same ballot as some of these other primaries. And so it's creating some issues because in especially voting centers, East River in South Dakota, they're having to print like I think 87 different ballots or something like that to be available in these areas because there's so many races going on and they're all supposed to be on the same ballot. But one of the things that I'd like to work on is recount timelines. So we had an issue in Rapid City here with the Rapid City school district election, school board election, where someone was sworn in while a recount was still taking place. And so to ensure that that board's annual meeting doesn't happen before the recount has taken place and been kind of cleaned up and decided. So that's one of the things I'll be working on. I've got
So wait, real quick, just to pause you there. So you're saying you do not want somebody to be sworn in until the recount is official?
Yeah, because if you're a candidate and you don't know whether or not you rightfully won or not, let's say you and I are candidates and you won by 2 votes and I lost by 2 votes and there's a recount still taking place.
But yeah, keep going.
So if you won the election, it's unfair to me as the candidate that lost by 2 votes if we're still going through the legal process of the recount challenge for the school board to meet and swear you in as the rightful winner of that school board election because the recount hasn't even happened yet. And so that's essentially what happened in Rapid City this year. And we want to ensure that, those recounts get completely cleared up. Any legal challenges that were going to happen before that person is sworn in so that there's more trust in the election system as well. So someone's not like wrongly sworn in and has to be like kicked out of their office and then someone else be sworn in. That just like creates a lot of confusion and I think mistrust in the election system.
So I know one of the things that you're working on is codifying some of the president's executive agenda here in the state of South Dakota, which you would think it's a Republican supermajority state, Republican administration, that already there would be so much alignment there between the 2 policies.
Well, what's interesting about what a lot of the president is putting in place with executive orders is that, on day one of, anytime the next Democratic administration would take place, they can just undo all of those policies. And so one of the efforts of many Republican lawmakers across the country at both the national and the state level is to codify some of those policies. And so one of the things that actually came out this summer was South Dakota was issuing commercial driver's licenses or CDLs to non-citizens that shouldn't have had them. And so there are some non-citizens that are immigrants, like farm workers and things, that are allowed to have CDLs to work on. We have a lot of South Africans in the middle of the state that work on farms that come. They're allowed to have CDLs, but what happens is we had a policy that after their stay is up, when their work permits expire, that their CDLs were still valid. And then we were also issuing them to Canadians, and there's some process there. And so I have a bill that kind of clarifies all of this super in specific policy on that. And then also Senator Taffy Howard has a couple similar related about making sure that anybody who's on the road speaks English and can read the road signs and things just to ensure safety. And these are policies that are handed down from the Trump administration that we want to make sure is codified in South Dakota law to ensure that if there's ever a Democratic governor one day that maybe doesn't want some of these policies, that this is the law in statute, not just best practices that our current administration is following.
So your policy, I know, would make sure that at the time that if somebody comes here for work and they're allowed to be in the United States for a certain amount of time, it would ensure that that CDL expires at the same time that person's supposed to leave the United States and go back to their home country, correct?
That's essentially correct. I think it does expire slightly after the time that their work permit expires, and this is, again, all federal policy that's decided, and so I don't remember the exact amount of months that it is. I think most work permits are usually for a year. I think the CDLs can only be good for like 18 months or something, and the statute says something along the lines of like whatever is lesser. But yes, that's essentially the effect, is that, you know, you shouldn't have a valid CDL in a country that you should no longer be in.
Okay, so there's a bill I know you were speaking about before we came on here. You said that you're looking at raising the age to marry here in South Dakota to 18. Currently it's 16, but to leave some important exemptions in that. Can you explain this legislation?
Yeah, so you'll probably see, especially with all the primaries coming up in South Dakota, you'll get some postcards about a bill that took place actually in the 2025 legislative session that was purportedly to get rid of child marriage in South Dakota. Child marriage is not legal in South Dakota to the extent that no one can get married in South Dakota that's any younger than 16. Now, right now in South Dakota, anybody can get married from 16 to 18, even though they're technically in the law a minor. But that's in line with our age of consent in South Dakota, which is 16 as well. And so this policy that was put in front of us last year was going to make the age of marriage 18, no exceptions. And it was put forward by one of my colleagues who, I believe in good faith, was trying to avoid some of actually the trafficking issues that happen with people under the age of 18. But the issue is that if our age of consent is 16, that essentially means that in policy, South Dakota was saying that as a 16-year-old, you're allowed to consent to sexual acts, and you potentially could create another life by doing that. But if it's your religious belief that you want to get married before that child is born, then in South Dakota, we're not going to allow that. And there were some, other pro-life organizations that had issues with that, because it obviously could push for, minor women to want to get an abortion at 16 or 17 because they can't get married. And so basically what my policy or my idea is to, make the age of marriage 18, but to have some exceptions. So let's say one of the members of the couple is 17 and the other one is 18, and they're going off to the military. Allow that couple to get married so that they can do that. If there's a pregnancy involved, if you have two parents' consent, if you have a judge's consent of the marriage. So essentially just put some protections in place to stop some of the trafficking issues, but also to create carve-outs for oftentimes issues that happen all the time, even in 2025, 2026 in South Dakota, with younger people needing to get married because of these certain situations.
Okay, moving forward, I know that you've primed on the Senate side. This is a House concurrent resolution to honor the life of Charlie Kirk. Can you explain that to me? I know we spoke the day that Charlie was killed. Mm-hmm. You were the first interview I did. I remember you were very emotional about this. This is somebody that you actually had personal ties to and run-ins with.
Yeah, if I ever write a book one day, Blake, that whole day of you walking in with the news camera in your hand and me seeing the tweet of Charlie Kirk is dead, I will never forget that. And it's been, interesting to see all of the fallout, especially with Erica, who is a former Miss Arizona I knew from the pageant world as well. And the kind of the direction of Turning Point. But, I think that it's still really important to realize how impactful Charlie's life was, especially on younger generations of conservatives in America, and to honor his life for the impact that he made, and to see, whether you disagree with him or not, how much we're still talking about his impact, and every move that Erica makes, people throw rocks at things that, obviously have impact or shine. And so I think it's really important to honor the impact in life that he lived, and the changes in young people's lives. And he made young people feel heard, even if you were not the popular opinion on college campuses. And he impacted my life forever. He endorsed me when I ran for a party position, and was one of the reasons that I got involved in running for office at such a young age. Was a connection that I made at a Turning Point conference, and some of my closest friends came from the Turning Point world. And so it's an honor to be the prime sponsor of that in the Senate.
Okay. Next, the session again is upon us. What do you hope to see as far as decorum between, different lawmakers as we go into the legislature?
Well, it's interesting. It's only 38 days, right? And so at the beginning, everyone's pretty jovial, and you're friends again, even if you disagreed and were kind of not friends at the end of the 38 days last year. The 9 months off, allows you to forgive and forget a little bit, but it'll be interesting to see. I think property taxes are going to be a big one. Data centers are going to be a big topic. We've got some Second Amendment legislation with silencers, and so big topics on big policy issues that often create some division even amongst Republicans. And so, we'll see how it goes. But the nice thing about South Dakota is that, at the end of the day, I do really believe that people are people, and we still, even some of my colleagues that I disagree with on almost everything, at the end of the day, you can still go and play pool after we get done, or go have a beer, and there's a lot of friendliness despite disagreements, because we all are just there to serve the people that we represent.
Okay, you said something interesting there, though. It's true. It's a short legislative session. It's like a couple of months, and then lawmakers have all this downtime. Do you think Washington, D.C. needs more downtime? Do you think we would see better relations between the two parties in D.C. if they had a chance to really step away and kind of take those boils down to simmers?
I think it's interesting. I believe that we could probably do better in Congress if our congressional members spent more time at home actually listening to their constituents and what the people that they represent want. At the same time, I think in recent years, members of Congress have gone home to fundraise a lot more. They're not really spending a lot of time with their constituents. They're spending more time with donors because of how much money is involved in politics. And back in the day when members' kids used to go to the same high school in Washington, D.C., and they actually lived in D.C. instead of flying back, every Thursday night and then getting back into the Capitol on Monday morning, there were a lot more friendly relations comparatively to what we kind of see in South Dakota, where we all still work and live together. And those relationships are important. And so to the extent that they should go home and spend more time in their districts, yes, but also to the extent that they should have to kind of live together in DC and still have those relationships that they used to back in the day, I think would be good for our country as well.
All right, State Senator Hulse, anything you want to get to that we haven't touched on?
I don't think so, Blake. I mean, I'm in this chair quite frequently, put me in the hot seat, but I'm really excited to see kind of what happens this legislative session. I've got a lot of things that I think will to make the state a better place, and it's an honor to represent District 30, and I'm excited to go back and get to do my dream job. So. All
right, well, State Senator Amber Hulse, we do appreciate you joining Political Pulse for I don't know, 5th or 6th time at this point.
You've had a lot of star-studded guests here, so it's an honor to even be still considered to sit here and be asked back, because you're a busy guy.
But you were the canary in the coal mine. I always say this. I remember at the beginning, I think when we would pitch the show, I think people were like, what even is this?
Well, now everybody wants to be on. You've had governors, you've had congressional candidates. I'm very impressed. The
show's growing. We are very happy, and we're very thankful for everybody who does do the show. So yeah, it's been really cool to see see what it's been. I lost my co-host though.
Well,
if you remember, I had a co-host in the beginning.
I do.
So
we must have scared him away.
Well, anyways, Senator Hulse, we do appreciate it.
Thanks, Blake.
All right, and that will do it for your Political Pulse.